Next, from the state capitol, the House Committee on Higher Education hears testimony on the impact of performance-based funding on students and administrators. This proposal is designed to give more money to colleges that hit certain performance measurements. We hear the testimony of Karen Anderson, Executive Director of the Illinois Community Colleges Board. This runs about 30 minutes.
Community colleges support performance-based funding. We did it before the task force because the large majority of our dollars are divided based on formula, based on performance. In fact, our largest single line item is based on the amount of credits that are completed by and for students in community colleges. But in this one occasion, the community colleges of Illinois certainly follow the lead of the flagship University of Illinois by indicating that we support the concept, and we certainly wish for dollars to be allocated for performance-based funding, but we would suggest that the better model is for new dollars to be provided for performance-based funding rather than cutting out, in this case, a fairly small percentage of dollars from the existing funding. We thank the legislature for the funding that we received, but it was flat funding for fiscal year 14. In order to accommodate performance-based funding dollars, which was $360,000 on a base budget of approximately $300 million, those funds were cut out. When you do that, as the University of Illinois indicated, there are some folks who may receive the same amount of dollars, some receive less, some may receive more. But you're talking about very small amounts of dollars among the 39 community college districts of the state of Illinois. My father had a saying for that perhaps that juice is not worth the squeeze. And in this circumstance, that may be the case. Therefore, it would be our recommendation that once new dollars are part of the program, and by that we mean substantial new dollars, that larger amounts of new dollars for performance-based funding would create the appropriate incentives to make performance funding hit the model that was anticipated. That is not to say, however, that community colleges are not performance funding based. The 6 categories of performance funding are not foreign to community colleges. In fact, they make common sense, and they are the goals and objectives of community colleges with or without specific performance funding. They're common sense goals, and community colleges would work towards that. So in this circumstance, we are saying that what was articulated by the University of Illinois, what we're articulating, we believe to be very much the same. You also had affordability as one of the items to be discussed today. We'll leave that till the end. If there's questions on that, I can assure you that community colleges would love to talk about affordability, but we'll stick to performance funding for the moment. Now I'll turn the microphone to Karen.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chairwoman. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about, as always, the mission and the focus of the community college system. And as Tom mentioned, we have long supported the concept because it is an integral part of our mission and also part of our funding formula. However, in order for performance-based funding to have the most impact, the community college system adopted 5 basic guiding principles to help us to determine the best use of the funds and the metrics. Those 5 guiding principles are, and they're not new to this discussion today at all, but first of all, that the emphasis needed to be placed on performance, that ultimately those other states that we've looked at where success has been had through performance-based funding, the emphasis was on the performance and not on the funding. The second principle was that universities and community colleges should have separate funding and metrics because it was important for us that performance-based funding recognized the difference in the missions and between the four-year universities and our community colleges. The third guiding principle was that the community colleges should not compete against each other for their performance-based funding, but rather compete against themselves in order to show continuous improvement in all of the areas of the metrics. The fourth was that each district should be measured against itself and against the changes on a year-to-year basis in order to establish some district performance benchmarks. And the last guiding principle was that each district, or that no new state funds, if no new state funds were appropriated, that the performance metrics should be implemented without any financial impact. The 6 categories and the 6 metrics that Tom mentioned are as followed, and I won't go into a lot of any discussion on those, but if you have questions, I'd be glad to field those. The first was degree and certificate completion, and we emphasized both degrees and certificates because certificates are a reason that many of our students enter a community college because it gets them more quickly into employment. Second was degree and certificate completion for at-risk students. We serve the hardest to serve students, and so we thought that one of the performance measures, that the metrics that we should be evaluated on had to be the performance of those at-risk students and the success of those. The third was transfer to a four-year institution, because again, a main part of our mission is to prepare students for transfer to a university. The fourth is remedial and adult education advancement. That gets back again to those hardest to serve populations, the students who need the most work. And even though those students often don't complete, they do show advancement, and in many cases, those advancements are significant enough for them to enter the workforce in better jobs. Momentum points, we looked at a variety of momentum points, including first-time part-time students who completed 12 credit hours, and first-time full-time students who completed 24 hours within the first year. We also looked at adult education students who increased and advanced by a grade level, again, within that first year. And last, we determined a metric to be transferred to another community college, because our community colleges are community-based, and so very often one of the benefits of having so many community colleges in the state is there's always one nearby in your community. So as our students are often very mobile, we find them transferring from one community college to another successfully, because of a job relocation, because of family relocation, for a variety of reasons. So therefore, in order for performance-based funding to really focus on the performance, we feel that a longitudinal analysis of the metrics needs to be made. And as we're just beginning to implement the Illinois longitudinal data system in the state, we're unable to really have a full understanding of the impact of performance-based funding. So as we become more able to track our students into employment, we will be able to do a more thorough job and a more thorough analysis of how well performance-based funding is working, because ultimately the issue is not about any one of the metrics, but rather about how each student performs and each student advances, and those advancements translate into employment and career opportunities that provide the student with a livable wage and job security. And so that's one of the things that we will be able to measure very effectively once we get the longitudinal data system in place. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ellen Andrus, to our Chief Financial Officer, in case she has anything to add or for clarification on any of the questions regarding our funding formula.
I don't necessarily need to add anything. One of the things they asked me to describe was how we actually allocated the funds. And simply put, we take the 6 metrics that Karen talked about, and each community college, what she said is they're looked at for themselves. So, for example, if I'm going to take transfer to a 2-year, we would take one college, Blackhawk, and we would look at their 09 and their 010 transfer rates and compare them to their 8 to 9. And if they increased, they go into the pot. If they didn't, they don't. So they would get part of the performance. So it's not a matter of what somebody next to you is doing. It is absolutely each community college competes against their performance from the year before. So for each metric, we just compare them to the previous year, and they either do better and go into the pot for performance, or they don't, and that's how we report it. So all of those are out on our website in any community college, and any individual can go out there and look and see what their community college is doing and how they're performing in each metric.
Were you going to add something?
I was simply going to say that Ellen is looking at a chart which would indicate of the 6 categories, $60,000 apiece, how much of the $60,000 was actually divided between the community colleges, which reinforces our indication that it's probably not giving a fair trial to performance-based funding when the amounts of the incentive become that low. In almost all cases below 10,000, in some cases, many cases below 5,000.
In the performance-based funding that you've alluded to, that you've been doing all along, because that is your part of your policies and your procedures, were there colleges that got more money some years, and maybe were there colleges that didn't get additional allocations some years?
As far as performance-based funding goes, there are colleges that in certain under certain points got 0. If you didn't produce or in that column, you didn't get anything. So each momentum point was separate. On our regular funding, the $350 million, we also, and it's something that comes to our attention every year, when we get our appropriation, it could be level funded, but every community college is not level funded. It's based on credit hours generated. So when you go home to your district and say, we appropriated level funding, that your district could get more or less depending on how many students they have enrolled at that time. So we have always said that is a performance piece because every year they have to generate credit hours in order to get payment for the different courses.
So they have to offer the right courses, they have to do the right kind of PR to get the people, so part of that is their performance.
Correct.
And I do understand that your metrics are for your community colleges, and I think all along when we were talking about this in the committee that Representative Pritchard referred to, we talked about metrics being specific for, different ones for community colleges, different ones for the 4 years, and even among the 4 years, different metrics systems. So, I'm glad to hear that you say you've already been using something like that. Are there any other questions? Representative Pritchard.
At the risk of redundancy, did you talk a little bit about what you have changed since we introduced performance-based funding in the operation of the various community colleges?
Certainly, performance-based funding has increased the awareness on some of the colleges with some of the categories and the impact that they can have with some changes. That's something it certainly has added to. That's a philosophy that we've had at the ICCB for a long time with some of our unrestricted funds that we might get through federal funds, for example. We have targeted certain populations, or we've targeted certain best best practices that we want the colleges to encourage. And performance-based funding has allowed us to do that, I think, on a broader scale.
But you don't have any specific evidence of what changes and what results those changes have produced?
No, because it's a small amount of money over a short period of time. So it's very hard to really be able to fully evaluate or to do a complete analysis of the impact based on both the dollar amount and the length of time and the number of students in each one of those categories. And one of the things that we mentioned earlier was that given a longer period of time with more money, and once the longitudinal data system is set up and we can track students then into employment, to really see the impact of some of these changes that have been made, we think we'd be able to have a much better understanding of what the impact is. But at this point, again, without new money, without additional funds, without a longer period of sustained time to see the impact, it's very difficult to make that analysis.
Have you surveyed your member institutions to see what practices, you call them best practices, they are implementing? I know Complete College America has put forth a number of best practices. Do you have any survey results to see how many of the community colleges are adopting some of these best practices to try to impact the performance we're talking about?
We do have some indications. We know how many colleges, for example, are participating in integrated instruction, where they develop the basic skills of students at the same time that they teach them some of the skills of an occupational program. We know we know what some of the colleges are doing to increase their student services and advising practices so that students are, they're more aware of some of the shortfalls. We know what the colleges are doing, for example, to improve their evaluation and their assessment of student skills, so that there can be better placement in remedial courses and a better tracking of students. So that kind of information we do have. Some of that is independent of performance-based funding, and some of it is not.
So if you have some results, could you share that with the committee? Not now, but
Sure.
if you could follow up with some kind of documentation of what you have found in your surveys, and certainly look at such things as what community colleges are doing to reduce time to degree,
Yes.
what they're doing to work with high schools to make sure the students are college-ready,
Yes.
and what career path selection they might be looking at to help students make the right choice, to get into the right careers, to reduce the hours of credit that they accumulate before they ask for a degree or transfer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
As a legislative group, what we need to do is make sure good people are in the positions and then get out of their way and let them do their job, and not tie up a bunch of their time with busy work and paperwork, because every hour spent on that is an hour that can't be spent with student progress. So that's why I'm asking. I just wanted to be clear that I'm not asking as a big proponent of this. I'm asking as a person who wants to know, is this tying up a lot of your time that could be better spent in other ways?
And that's the reason for our suggestion that we want to be very respectful of the revenue issues that legislators face. And we thank you for level funding that we received this year. We would simply suggest that on performance funding that it might be appropriate to take a hiatus on that until such time as you have additional dollars in addition to flat funding that could be large enough to make the results significant. Additionally, when you talk about larger amounts, in other words, new money going to community colleges in significant amounts, would be an appropriate place to consider performance funding dollars, because then what you create are winners but no losers. In this, when you carve out from the current amount, especially when it's $360,000, you do spend a significant amount of time to show your progress in these areas for a small amount of reward, and it's dollars that you community college system would have had under any extent. So in that sense, we agree with the University of Illinois that if we're talking about new dollars, and we'd love to have that conversation, but if we're talking about substantial new dollars for community colleges, we think performance funding is absolutely an appropriate place to look at that. But in the current circumstance, we're just not sure how much bang we're getting for that buck, especially when the matrices are the same goals that we would want as community colleges anyhow, that for which we're striving to achieve with or without performance funding. It's part of the goals and missions of community colleges.
I, for one, just want to say I think you're all doing a great job, and I appreciate it, and I feel really bad for how much the increase in tuition has been for our everyday people. College shouldn't just be for rich people.
Representative Hayes and then Representative Hammond, unless I've got those backwards, you two can. All right, thank you.
You talked a little bit about, in particular, I guess I would be particularly interested if we had a situation where we did adopt a model that looked at incrementally new dollars and in applying this to new dollars that would come into the system, either to community colleges or the four-year system. You articulated earlier that you have special challenges in relation to non-traditional students, first-generational students, students from challenged fiscal backgrounds, students juggling, coursework and family, maybe multiple jobs, et cetera. And so currently, I believe you suggested that the limited dollars that are involved with this are looking at past performance of an individual institution. What did we do this year versus last year versus whatever the metric is 5 years ago? Am I hearing you to suggest that even if we would have a situation going forward that a formula would create more dollars into the system, that you still would support that kind of a model, an individual institution kind of competing against that incremental improvement versus competing against all of the colleges in the system?
Well, one of our problems was when we went through picking these out is the community college system is so different. We have city colleges of Chicago, and then down south we'll have a community college that is very small with a lot of miles associated in trying to get students into one place. You can't compare those two. And then if you throw the College of DuPage in, that's a very small area with a huge campus, there's no way to come up with a comparison that the three of them can be equal. And that's how we came up with the idea of you have to perform against yourself. So you have to do better. Your community college, each college has to do better from the year before. So it gives them all a chance. And that's kind of, it took us a long time to come around to that's what we wanted to do. We looked at putting them into peer groups, but still it was just too different in the peer groups. And so that's how we came up with that. And the second piece of what you asked for, I feel like I have to add in, while we keep talking about new money for performance-based funding, the current formula that we have, briefly, it's 3 pots of money: the state, student tuition, and local money. Student tuition has been increasing. Local tax dollars are either flat or decreasing, and the state has either been level or decreasing. So right now, the community college system is running at a $344 million deficit from the state. And that is true money that they are losing. When we take costs and subtract out local money and student tuition, that is money that they're losing. So at the same time we talk about increasing performance-based funding, we're also trying to pay for tutoring and pay for instructors and pay for all the student services with a smaller pot, and we're saying do it better because we're going to have performance-based funding. And so you have to tie the regular budget to performance-based funding also. So if we increase the performance side without increasing the system budget, we're also saying, do a really good job, but we're paying you the same amount of money that we did 10 years ago, and you have more than 1 million credit hours than you did 10 years ago. So that's kind of a piece that's in there that we haven't discussed with performance-based funding, is the fact that we're trying to sustain just tutoring, counseling with less money, and we have the performance piece in there.
Representative Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is more of a comment than a question, if you will. And while I appreciate what the community colleges are doing as they address the demands of performance-based funding, what I am seeing, certainly in my district, and I am privileged to have 3 community colleges in my district, but I am seeing the community colleges in the last several years stepping up to the needs of the communities, partnering with the communities, and whether it be in the manufacturing sector and expanding their programs there, and in the railroad industry, and kudos to them for that, because many of those programs and the healthcare programs and the building trades programs, they're very, very expensive programs, and I appreciate that. And for many years, as you were challenged financially, those were a lot of the programs that you looked at to cut. I see almost a reversal of that trend, where the community colleges are partnering with the communities and the manufacturers and the employers to address their needs, and to recognize that not everyone is going to receive a 4-year degree, that where they need to be is with a 2-year degree. And I just think that it's important that that, to me, is performance-based funding, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? It looks as though you might want to have a closing statement. Is that the sign I'm getting from you?
If I may, and I'll be very brief. In summary, we're simply indicating that we wish to do performance funding, but we would ask for a hiatus until such time as we have substantial new dollars to accomplish that. In the meantime, we're still going to do everything we can to achieve the goals based on the dollars that the state of Illinois provides. And in that comment, I do want to thank you for your continued support of community colleges across the state of Illinois. And on behalf of the 3 people here, we do thank you for this opportunity to come and speak with you today. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.